After about 10 seconds of thinking about it, say that's wonderful. The whole idea of developing these methods is that it will help people. And if other people want to go and claim authorship of them, and it leads to greater dissemination, fantastic, right? I don't need fame or glory or wealth in that. It's the people who benefit. And just as a curiosity, someone wrote to me and told me that they had just heard about a pediatrician that was giving workshops and talks about toilet training, and they'd written a book on it, and wanted my commentary on that. And so I decided I'd look at Google and see about the book, and while I had Google on there, I clicked onto Amazon, and they have a specification on that if you want the title of the book, a particular book on a particular topic, then you type in that topic, and they will list all of the books that have that topic listed in the title. And so I typed in toilet training, and there was something like 150 books with toilet training. There weren't any beforehand. In fact, when I first sent that into a publisher, they said, well, you don't mean a book, you mean a pamphlet? You mean a piece of paper? That's really been a delight. Yeah, that book's been translated into every language, and it's sold several million copies, and I keep getting calls from people asking for particular details of that, which I very gladly return the comment. Well, here, let me. The greatest gratification, as I said, for me was in accord with what I said, why we all went into psychology, and that is so that people would benefit from it. And if you write the books, because more people will benefit from it, and if Dr. Phil wants to emphasize it even further. But what's distinctive is when I go to any of the malls, I look at some of the bookstores that are there, and they have parenting section and toilet training books. And up until recently, there were often 2 or 3 toilet training books by other people. And I couldn't help but go and look through them and glance at them briefly. The thing I was particularly interested in was to what extent were the methods that the individuals were advocating based on data. And the answer was none. Isn't that incredible? It was almost like going back, right, to Freud and John Watson. It was all marketing. It claims, right, that something seems to have what we call euphemistically heuristic value, right? Does it seem to have some overall sensibility, or we imprinted on that because you happen to take a course on that, and your instructor happens to have that. And so, worshiping John Watson is great. He's a behaviorist, but doing the outcome data. There's nothing that he recommended about parenting that had been validated or empirically tested. So that part of it is a shame, and that is that all that emphasis on there, and it turned out that particular work that I did not have the ultimate complement, and that is really that of imitation. What other imitation is? Why didn't other people do research on it? Why didn't other people do data on it? If all they do is come up with another speculative idea of what happened to work with their own child, and that is something based on anecdote or what other people have said, and that is testimonials, then we haven't advanced at all. But I think here in behavior modification, we're very much as the medical profession was not long ago. That is, previously, the treatments in the medical profession were new treatments, and training was based on what they really call the journeyman method, and that is you did an apprenticeship. You rode circuit with a practitioner, and thereby learned what that practitioner did and then imitated it. Well, that was wonderful for horizontal dissemination, but nothing for innovation. And medical profession changed drastically when they changed the nature of medical education so that it would include the scientific principles and the treatments that developed from them. And the FDA began having an emphasis on empirically validated treatments, such that now If your local physician uses a drug that has not been approved by FDA, then there are legal consequences, not to mention adverse professional reactions on that. And so I'm told by people in the medical profession that Dr. Spock, for example, however popular he was with the public, that professionally he was an outcast. That he was talking about what seemed to work in his own individual practice without any critical evaluation of studies that had been done that attested to the validity of what he was recommending. Well, let's see, onward and forward. And then the next topic is a very exciting one, and that is the job club. Employment, right? You have to think, what is the most important things in their life, right? What is your name? What do you do, right? What do you do for a living? And first thing you ask a child is, how old are you? What do you want to be when you grow up? And you identify people, right? I am an optometrist, I am a machinist, I am a dentist, right? I am a salesman. And we identify ourselves with that. The most important thing in looking at it from a reinforcement point of view, a behavior analysis point of view, what we're talking about is what is the response that the individuals are making, that contribute to the functioning of society. And the reinforcer is obviously the remuneration that results. And so how much does he make? He's a millionaire. His salary is in 5 figures or 6. He's very, very wealthy. He's very affluent. And so, that's really very far afield now, right, from toilet training, but it's not far afield from the token economy. What happened with the token economy was after it's been in operation for several years, it's fine. They're now functioning and receiving great happiness and reward and satisfaction in where they are. But now, what about the outside world? Take the next giant step. What can I do to develop some means of them becoming functioning members of society? Well, of course, you do that on a contrived basis when you have these workshops. And in the workshops, you take contracts from individuals. You say, and they give you the contracts explicitly because they want to benefit retarded individuals or mentally ill individuals. And they're obliged to pay them salaries, and so why should they pay them a salary? They could have a non-retarded or non-handicapped person do the same thing. And there's been an alternative approach that's existed in the field. There's been that of coaching, where you hire someone, and the employer knows the individual is retarded, but that you assure that you'll be able to override any problems that result from that handicap by having a paid coach that will come in to work with the individual, to work with the supervisor. So that's a contrived situation. What we want individuals who are engaged in competitive employment, that they are hired because of the value of the work that they are doing, and they are being paid according to current salaries. Well, that's a pretty big step. That's not what's going on. What's going on is that they don't work. When they're discharged out of the institution, that's no great accomplishment. And that incident I recounted to you about how I obtained that board, and they said that everybody can be discharged by 5 days by Monday, has led me to have great disbelief in any studies that uses the principal measure of benefit, the extent to which individuals are discharged. The easiest way to get people discharged from hospital is to just cut the benefits, just cut the budget, and then they'll all be out. So that's no criteria. And so so that was the objective, and that's a pretty giant step. So I'll tell you the story of how it developed on that in this effort to try to get handicapped individuals out into the workforce. And here's a case where the conceptual analysis ran into a dead end. It was conceptual, completely off base. And then try to say, sit back and do a behavioral analysis of what the employment situation is about, and thereby consider what was suggested as to how you could succeed in having these mental patients hired. And that is that the reinforcement for the employer is the high productivity that exists, and especially relative to other employers, and that is that the individual would produce more than the individuals will for other employees, and they will seek out those individuals who are the most qualified, that are the most conscientious, the most productive. And the employees, of course, they will be more likely to be hired if they are experienced in the field. The employees now do not have to train them. And so that immediately suggested that the thing to do to obtain employment for the handicapped was to give additional vocational training to the patients, so they would now have more competence than individuals otherwise would. And to then present these individuals to the employers, given that they have had all of this experience and these skills, and they would hire them. And so I created a workshop. So first we looked to see what are the skills that are in demand, and that was easily done by looking through the newspaper want ads and what type of positions were there that they had the advertisements for us, the positions that were open. And it turned out it was in the textile industry. And so I set up a small factory. And I hired as a foreman of the factory someone who was working full-time in an existing textile industry in the area. And he came in on his off hours and off days and sick leave and all to go into training. So I had the exact, so I had the same, so I'm sure I had the same person there. And then he knew which machines to order, so we ordered those machines. He ordered which materials to order, and we had them and what kind of things to make. And we had the individuals working in there, and according to the workman's evaluation, that they were very, very productive and had the experience. And so this took an enormous amount of effort and energy and expenditure. And you couldn't go wrong. How could people not hire them? Well, when they did go out to interviews and looked in the ads for the positions that were open, not a single one of them was hired. And so, like I said before, what do you do when something goes wrong? You use that as an impetus for finding out what went wrong and to remedy it, and then to try to incorporate those changes into something that will go right. And meanwhile, I talked to other individuals that had just been hired by that company that I happened to know, and they had no experience, and they were hired instantly. Something's wrong. There's something more to what being hired than this retrospectively very naive notion I had about what's involved in the hiring process. But that's the myth that we're all under. And that is, you go to school, you get advanced training in something, and then people throng, come around trying to hire you. And that's as much true whether you're learning to be an air conditioning technician or an MD or a psychologist. That's what you do. You prepare yourself for a field. It seems such an obvious truism that I don't feel guilty about having used that as the basic premise in trying to develop it. Well, something else is involved. And so try talking to people about what it is that determined they're being hired. Just asking people about it. And the answer inevitably clustered around one or two categories primarily. They had need for one of the brightest, most energetic person that I showed up, and so I was hired. Well, that was self-flattering, but if that were the case, then why weren't my people hired? I took the positions, let's start at the very beginning, this idea of the response sequence. What goes on? There's something that goes on before the interview. There's something that goes on before the hiring. What is that? Well, very first step, obviously, is you have to know where to apply. How do you know where to apply? And so, and take it from there. And so I gave out a questionnaire to all of the members of this graduate program they were in. These were all rehab counselors. They all were working for a master's. They most of them had been employed partially before they came to graduate school by governmental agencies to competitive examinations of the civil service. And asked them how, not how, why they were hired. They gave a crowd a questionnaire. Imagine a behaviorist giving out a questionnaire. Right? They gave out a questionnaire, find out what's going on here. And then the first thing, how did you first hear about that job? Not how you hired or anything else about it, but how did you even hear about applying for that job? And there were several other questions, and I'll give you the answers to those as well. And the astonishing answer that came back on that was that 2/3 of them said they first heard of it through a relative, a friend, or an acquaintance. In other words, they never got to the interview otherwise. It was through this channel. That's incredible. There were some other things that they mentioned in there that were equally startling to me, and that is that the individuals that they were asked whether the job had been publicly advertised, and the vast majority of them, no, they weren't. That was startling. So people go around looking for the help wanted ads, do the professional listings of jobs thing, that most of the jobs are not there. Another question was, to what extent did the individual who first told you about applying to that place, to what extent were they of any assistance in obtaining the job? And half of them were. So they were just saying, well, you know, the biggest industry in town is General Motors, and so you ought to go apply there. That is what the fact. They were giving this direct assistance. Well, so I obviously was going along with the wrong way. Training the person, and I mean, they couldn't even getting to the interview. They didn't even know which interviews to go to. They had nobody to help them. There's no person involved. And so, whoops. And so, all else, and so, well, I was in the Department of Rehabilitation Counseling. That's the same one John Lutzka, we were both in. And they had 3 tracks, and one of them was vocational counseling. And so I had the experts there to go to save me the trouble of doing a big literature search, and asked them, well, what are the procedures that are available, well, first, for people who are handicapped? And one of them was this thing called this job placement, where you arrange for particular employers to hire people, and they would, and then assure them of the competence, the integrity of the individual, and that you would stand behind it. Obviously, that doesn't go very far. I asked them what studies have been done on that, and of course, none. None. Just like in the case of toilet training, nothing about the patients. So so the next step was, okay, if they don't have any for the job handicap, I couldn't understand that, because there's a department that's devoted to training people, or giving vocational counseling to counselors, telling them what to do with the handicap, and not a single outcome study. Well, and the procedures they were using, not very great. Well, the other was, what about normals? What are the results with normals? Have there been any outcome studies on that? And well, they didn't know of any. I did my own search in the literature on that. I found one. It was a master's thesis. I contacted the author, and he didn't know anything about it. That he needed a master's degree. He had to have a thesis to get a degree. His instructor designed it. He had no idea what was in it. So that went nowhere. So there's virtually none. Isn't it incredible? There's nothing there when you think of the billions of dollars that are spent by every government on increasing employment. Then no outcome studies on there. Well, but there are other statistics that are in existence, and of course every field is filled with statistics. descriptive statistics about what's going on. I don't know what to do about it. And so, in terms of, if you look at what was the means by which people obtained jobs through other means, and the thing that immediately comes to mind is looking in the newspaper and the help wanted ads. The other is going to the State Employment Service. They have different names for it now, but I guess you know, I think they call it Job Service now or something of that sort. Another is sending out resumes blindly. Then you make up a resume and you send them out blindly to other places. The other is private employment agencies. When you look at the statistics on that, and they can be fairly, well, some of them are fairly definite, but others are self-report, but still, none of them is over 5%. And that's not how people get jobs. The sociologists, so here, with all those fields, start looking at the literature, right? See what's going on. And some of the writings of sociologists who've been looking at this, and they have that figure about 2/3. It turns out many of the sociological studies found the same thing. 2/3. And that's true not only of the lower paid types of occupations, it's true of the higher paid ones, even medical, psychology. In fact, as professors and faculty, the astonishing statistic is that something like 90-something% of all of the jobs obtained are reported by the people who obtained them through the active intervention of somebody who was already on the faculty. Contacting somebody who was on the faculty who was going to put in a word for you and push for you. In other words, 90% over almost everyone. So, they use that as an argument for the fact that you can't change that, right? That it can't be done. It's almost like the untrainables, right, with the retarded. And that is what you have a class system here, whether we like it or not. We have circles we live in, we have contacts, and it doesn't make any difference what you major in college. If your father owns General and Electric, you're going to have a job. There's no question about it. If your name is Bush, you'll have a pretty good job. and so they use that as the argument for the fact that you can't change those things. You can't break out of this system. That if you're lucky enough to be able to choose your genetics, then you can have these other influences operating on you. Then it doesn't make any difference what field you go into, what you major in, that the odds are all either against you or in favor of you. And I remember at that time I was out at Stanford on a leave of absence there. I was part of a group and there was a sociologist in there. And when I was talking, at that time I was doing some evaluations of this employment method, and he was quoting from his own book, said it's a waste of time. That you're locked in. You're locked in by your sociological and personal factor. Well, so not only nothing had been done, either with nobles or with handicapped, there were all these incredible, these strong reasons from the sociologists that you couldn't do anything on it. And in terms of behavioral analysis, being useful in coming up with a solution, it was all wet. It didn't work. Well, and so one can either cry about it and say, well, we're stuck, or do something about it. And just as in the other case we mentioned where we had exceptions, you do something about it. And then there's those factors that are important. Stress them. And so devise this system, and I'll describe other methods, things involved in that. And there's the personal characteristics. And have them stress those in several different ways. One of them, identify all the people that you know that you have some social relationship with, and we make a list of them, and everybody that are in the area in which you want employment. And so we made a list, and everything was structured. None of this was given as broad advice. We had lists, and you checked off it. And your mother, your father, your brother-in-law, your son, who are they? Where are they living? And which ones are in the area in which you were willing to go to work. So that was one. And that is take advantage of all of these things. And not only your relatives, which would be the closest ones, but also classmates. Get out your yearbook and find out the people that are there. You have a Christmas card list. Get that out. people who live next to you, right? Or people, or and the other former employers and other people that you've worked with, right? And get their names, look them up in the telephone book, get their telephone, and make up a script of what to say to them, that they can call them on the phone and just read that. And the only thing they substitute is my name is, and also what their qualifications are. So that was number one, how to identify them. In other words, if the answer is all of these personal contacts, then take advantage of all of them. And structure the things so that you do that, so that you're not just, you're not on your own, in a disadvantage with everyone else. So that was one place. The other is on your Vita, when you make up your resume, that you put the personal characteristics on there, not just job things. You know, from 1987 to '88, I worked here. Talk about your personal characteristics. Job-relevant personal characteristics. And some of those keywords would be, and they don't apply to everyone, so the people would just use those as illustrative, circle them, and then we put them in their Vita. And that is that people enjoy working with me. I like to organize things. I've had extensive experience in that. I'm a company man, right? I don't mind working, right? I enjoy working hours to go and to have my employees succeed or whatever. Put personal characteristics in there, right? And then even I attend religious ceremonies, not necessarily naming the religion because that might have been unwell, but we're talking about the fact that you are a person of integrity. And so having that in there, not only that, but when you first contact them, and I'll talk to you about that on the phone, because you never call up saying, do you have a job? Right? Nobody hires a stranger. That's the message. Things are personal. You don't hire a stranger. Whether it's a phone call or whether it's a resume that comes through your desk and onto the trash can. That it has to be, it's something personal. And so, so in the Vita that they put down, not only writing down what their skills are briefly, but also these personal attributes. Also, we made up a script when they call people on the phone, as I just started saying. And and so they give their name. You know, my name is, they first of all call, ask for the person always in charge of the employment, never in personnel agencies. Personnel agencies are designed to exclude. The person who makes the decision is the person who will be actually supervising. And even if it's a personnel department, they'll often have the person who's the head of the department, that the person that the applicant will be working in to go and to screen them. And so get the name of that person. And then we have this other factor that is call them by name. How did you find out? Well, there's a rule there. When you call out for one job or another, and even if it doesn't come through, or if it does, if it looks as if it might, get the name of a referral. Is there any other place around that is hiring? Anyone that's hiring. And I told you my skill of hiring that, and that I might contact, and you have the name of the person, and by the way, do you have his telephone number? And then when you call on the phone, hello, my name is Bob Smith, and secretary asked, what is the nature of your call? It was personal. I'm calling your recommendation of John Montague. And so they'll answer your phone. They'll come to the phone. If you go and say, I'm looking for a job, I say, well, I'm personnel department's extension. So again, the personal, everything personal, right? You're not going to get to them. The average number of interviews, and sociologists and others have statistics on that, you couldn't believe is so small. It's something like 3 or 4. You ask people, how many interviews did you have before you got this job? That's all it is. So all the work is before the interview, and yet if you go and you look at what people do who are doing the job placement, they do interview rehearsal, which is great, and we did that too. But it's all jobs, again, from the behavioral point of view, it's what is the sequence of responses? Right? Start at the very, very beginning and work up. So taking that as an example, and that is, it's on your resume, it's on the call that you had, it's on obtaining lists of all the people that are close to you, and when you do call, make it real brief, right? Because right, all you want is to meet the supervisor who's likely to do the hiring, and then not that I want a job, that I may be looking for a job later. And I don't know, this is not a job interview, I just want to go meet you and talk to you so that if anything suddenly shows up in you, you're in trouble. you'll have some names in mind about who to call. You're doing them a favor. This is all written out, and you give your name, you say what your experience is in one letter, in one sentence, right? The next sentence, what your personal qualifications are, right? The things I mentioned about being a go-getter and being cooperative, and you've had that you're a company person and you take responsibility. You take responsibility without the need for supervision. All these things that are relevant, and then when can I see you? Tomorrow or the next day be more convenient, right? Multiple choice is much easier than free composition. And make an appointment. Then we have a schedule there where they write down their appointments, and so they're very, very busy. Well, so getting at the heart of it, again, totally wrong in the beginning, right? Took the obvious thing, anyway, just totally wrong. But now, having found out what is the major factor, instead of just bewailing it and bewailing the fact that you're off on the wrong foot, build on it, take advantage of that. And so that now, when you come in there and you say you're a friend and you were referred by so-and-so, and you have all these wonderful personal characteristics, they're going to be anxious. They're going to be anxious to hire you. Well, so that was one of the most important features of it, building on the personal attributes of it. There are several other things that I had in mind, and that is this same thing about abandoning the psychotherapy or the educational model of 40 or 50 minutes. You work to the person until they get a job, all day, all day. And that means they report at 9 in the morning and they're there working. And then it's under supervision and not the current methods. You give a talk and you're wonderful, there are jobs waiting, you find the right one and you get the people all excited, kind of, I call it a rah-rah kind of method. And these things are commercially sold, they sell tapes. In one of the studies I actually used that as a control. I went and read and designed people and had them do that. So I could take account of the placebo effect. Well, so that was one term. In other words, extended sessions. The other, active supervision. It's because what happened, I tried this thing out on an individual basis. That is, we put an ad in the paper, we help people find jobs, and then people came in and had the counselor deal with them separately. And we kept making all these changes because we found so many things that were a problem. Like, they couldn't make it. They couldn't make it. They couldn't make it. Even if they found a job, they didn't have the transportation because they were out of work. They don't have the transportation. And so, and the other is, look at the want ads. Well, they don't have the money to waste on the newspaper. And if somebody did offer them a job, they called on the phone, there's nobody to answer it because they didn't have a phone, or the people who, nobody was there, and the people who answered it didn't leave the message. So there was this incredible number of problems along the way, and so there was no single thing. But each one of these we addressed. When that was a problem, we didn't say, well, that only is 5% of the people. That's something we're going to build a system that takes that into account for everybody. And so we put this thing together and tried it out on an individual basis. And when we got to the point where we were pretty reliably finding jobs in a very short period of time for people, and the counselor said he was getting bored, that it was just too routine. He said, okay, maybe we should now try to go and standardize it. And so, okay, now examine it. What about the cost basis of it? Because there's some realities here. People who are unemployed don't have money. And if they have to go to a psychologist or to a rehab counselor and have to pay either, in current terms, either $60 or $120 a session, it's simply not going to happen. If you look at the employment agency, they actually say, some of them say they want 3 months' salary. Very expensive, and certainly for the executive positions. Once we got to that point, though, with individuals, look at the cost. How can we now make this so that it would be something that would be economically feasible? And the simple solution was, well, what do people do else with it? You do it in a group, right? Use mass production, right? And so we do it in a group. Well, and doing it in a group had some advantages, it had serious disadvantages. You no longer have the one-on-one attention that you could be giving, but it had other wonderful advantages. This was not a discussion group. I call it a job club, and so it sounds somewhat, it's gimmicky, it sounds entertainment, but that's almost the marketing type of a thing. The point is that it's very directed. It's almost like the child you're going to be toward a trend. That it's directed. The counselor there is busy every single moment. And so there are a number of problems to try to get around, and they are really problems. One of them is about transportation, that I mentioned that. Having them in a group turned out to be an advantage, because as long as they made it to the first meeting, one of the questions we asked is, do you have transportation needs? And do you have a car? And then hook them up so that the people who had an automobile could now give rides to those people. Even after they obtained the job, now how could they get it? Because the job club no longer was there, they no longer were attending it, what could they do? And so we gave specific instructions on how they should go contact the supervisor or talk to other employees when they were hired to see and ask, are there any of them who live near you? And then get their telephone numbers and call them up and arrange to pay them to come in. Well, that was just an example of that. Other than that, even getting bicycles, having bicycles available, which were very inexpensive. We rented them, let them use. The other was how do they present it, how do they make up a veto? They don't have a typewriter, they don't know how to type. Well, they had a secretary do it. The secretary was really good at it. She would do the typing. Couldn't have photocopies to give to people. That was even way back then in the 70s. They still had rather primitive photocopy machines, and we provided that. Telephone. We wanted them to call these places. Well, that was easy enough if you had one individual you're counseling, but if you have a group, well, we have a telephone for everybody. It looked like a bookie joint. You looked in there, you had bookies and everything, a telephone there for everybody. And of course, had them call. Of course, you gave them a script as to what to say. Well, how do you know they said it? Because we had an extension phone in each one of them. We listened, and that's not what they were told. And even with the script in front of them, they often deviated from it and decided to improvise. And so we had a buddy checklist. We buddied up everybody. Everybody was buddied up. And then buddy listened in on the extension while you talked on the phone, and the buddy had a checklist and checked on, what did you say? Did you give your name? Did you ask the person, supervisor, by name? Did you give the name of the person that had referred you to him? Did you give your personal qualifications in one sentence? Did you give your vocational qualifications in one sentence? Did you go make it clear that you just wanted to get to know them and there was not and you denied before they even asked whether you wanted an interview? And did you arrange for a callback, and so that you could call them back? Because that we found out people said that when they came back, people were offended and thought that it was pretty much a dead issue. So you're asking for a callback date. When could I call back to see if any need has arisen on your part? 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and again, multiple choice, and then write that on your calendar that you will call them back, and then you call back. You asked me to call back, and no, I'm calling you, but you asked me to call back at this time. So again, the personal part of it, and so those are some of the problems. The transportation was a real big one, talking about getting the names of all of the people. The one place where, and so we had them, and everything on the form, right? Not just giving them general advice about be nice, but when you're in the interview, give advice, for example, in the interview, that when you come in, we want you to go to talk to the secretary, introduce yourself to the secretary, if there is one there, by name, find out what her name is, what the name of the person is that will be interviewing you. And when you did come in, were you sure to go to look at the person in the eye all the time that you were there and when the person was talking? Did you nod your head indicating that you were listening and that you understood what they said? Did you shake the person's hand? And did you talk about these personal attributes, and did you talk about the job? And then we listed all of these things, and did you set another callback date as to when you could come back? And they were to fill that out after as soon as they left the interview, and bring that into the next session so the counselor could go in and look at it. Well, so this is really a very complex kind of a procedure, right? I mean, you're now going to bring the whole world to bear to help you in finding this job. Even not just friends and relatives, but also you went to the gas station. You went, you asked, You know, are there any colleges nearby here? You want to apply to a college, right? Are there any hotels here? Are there any truck companies, whatever it is? And have you heard of any job openings around here? It's amazing. People hear about these things. They see signs on the way to work. So you bring all of that to bear. So you have all of your relatives. And that was not to use this method as a preemptive or exclusionary of the other methods, but to also those that you make we arrange appointments in the job club to go to the state employment service. We bought newspapers in. We made photocopies of the help wanted ad section so that it had it in front of everybody. And you had your buddy was assigned to not only to look for jobs in those sections that were relevant to their own interests, but also their buddy's interests. So you had somebody else, you had other people, all these other people, they're looking for you. And when you were interviewed for a job, you had that talk. One of the questions that you asked is, in addition to myself, I have some friends who might be looking for a job. Are there any particular types of jobs that you have a need for now, or that you might? And you brought that back to the job club, and you put that on the job club list. And so that's the first thing you did when you came in. You looked at that list to see what kind of leads that there were. So you had all the other members of the job club there were about 10 of them. They were all looking for you. You had your relatives looking, you had a friend. And so it was very intense. We also had interview rehearsal, and that was no different than the usual things we found. Took a sort of survey of the types of questions people asked, and then what kind of things, how is it that you might answer it in a way that would be favorable to your likelihood to be employed. And so we did that. We have one person up there being interviewed, role-playing it, and then so the others could watch, and then they would take turns, and even because they were paired off, even interview each other that way. The role of the counselor, though, is an extraordinarily active one. The reason this thing works so well is that they were busy. And then he would go from one person to the other, and we had a 1-minute rule. You don't spend more than 1 minute with that person, and your comments will be of the following sort. Number one, praise. Look at what they're doing, see what they've done, either listening to them on the phone, if that's what they're doing, or whether they're typing, because they did send out resume, the letters that they had, or the list of friends, and look at that and give positive feedback on that. And then the second thing is what to do next. Either continue doing that, so you praise what they did, what to do next, number two. Number three, I'm going to be back, and this is what I'm going to be looking for. Let me see some more names on that list. You're doing great. You've got 5 names on there. You've arranged for 2 appointments. I'll be back, and let's see if you're going to build it up to number 4, so that'll keep you busy entirely tomorrow. So it was all very standardized and put into standardized forms that they were all given, and I wrote a book on that, and deliberately had the instructions to the publisher were that the book should not have a hardcover. It should be exactly 8 by 11 pages. Why? So they could Xerox it, so they could photocopy it. And rather than saying you have to get a copyright or permission, you wanted them to use it. And I've seen those pages turned up elsewhere by people who are not using the job club, because some of them make so much sense. Well, so that's how it emerged, and as it kept changing. As we ran into problems, we would add things. Either we got into transportation or the typing, or who was it they called on the phone, and then even added a letter to it. There were significant others. We would send a letter, have to wrote a letter, and have them brought it home to their family members. Because their family members are going to be their greatest advocates. And so telling them what they can do, and listening to what they can do. One of them was to tell all their friends about the fact that they are looking for job openings and what they might ask for, all the places they shopped at, all the social clubs that they were at. And the other was that any messages that occurred, be sure to give those messages to the job seeker. Thirdly, relieve the job seeker of all other responsibilities, which is what we found happened when people were looking for jobs. Well, you don't have a job, so you just go do all the shopping and take care of the children. And having them, so they have no time to look for a job, they're going to wait for the jobs to fall from the sky. But no, we told them they're going to be busy doing it, and if you want them to be helping, so of course, the parents of any of the teenagers and young adults who are living with them, they were begging for or suggestions about how they could help them to get a job. And if their spouse was unemployed, because there's no greater interest they had in life than they have another economically contributing member of their family. And so had them deliver the thing to them, and even made telephone calls to them to make sure that the paper hadn't gotten lost, and asked them to go to bring it in and talk to the people on the phone. So again, just as in the case of the toilet training and the other three, you would bring the whole world to bear on it, and in standardized form, not abstract, vague generalities. You have a form and you check them off and you write down something on this as to what you did on it. Well, so and the rest of the stuff, the rest of the materials in the literature, but the first step on that was to try the thing out after it was done on an individual basis. We had the group, we had an ad, had an advertisement. This is in Carbondale, Illinois, a small college town. Employment possibilities were extraordinarily limited. It was a one-industry town, a one-and-a-half industry. The university was in one. And it was a town of 29,000 people. You go over to the university, it was 23,000. So there were only 5,000 or 6,000 that were not students of the university. They were still faculty and employees. And there was another factory. They made some type of variation of Scotch tape. But those were the only employers in the town. So this is not a place where they could find jobs easily. And many of them, of course, they were interested in getting jobs elsewhere. We had a procedure for that. What do you do when you have one job in another town? And again, the personal part of it. Do you know anybody who lives in that town? Well, can that person stay with you? Can they send you a copy of that newspaper? Can you write that newspaper? So you can look at the help what they have. And finding a place to go to live there. We also gave them the other advice about looking for positions. And and we knew it was a fairly large number. It was about 100 job seekers, and randomly assigned them to either this job club method that I designated, or they look for jobs on their own. And the results were just wonderful.